welcome to the latest Field View episode of FP Next, our farmer and rancher driven podcast powered by John Deere. I'm one of your co hosts, Sarah McNaughton, and I'm here with Kurt Arns.
Hi, Sarah. Yes, we're powered by John Deere. So for all of your equipment and technology needs, see your local Deere dealer. So summer is flying by. My wife, who is a teacher, loves the 4th of July, but it's kind of a love-hate relationship because it seems once you hit Independence Day for teachers and students, it kind of signals the halfway point in summer, and they all know that classes are only a few weeks away. So driving across the region, there's still plenty of water in many of the fields. At the same time, corn is tasseling. Many of the corn and bean fields are spread out because planting dates were spread out. So it'll be interesting to see how the crop progresses as we get into the second half of our growing season. So, Sarah, how do things look over in the Dakotas?
So, the time of recording this podcast, there's been some recent hail damage that kind of leveled some fields and did some damage, and farmers are still battling the rain in our area, but everyone's getting excited for small grains harvest, and farmers seem pretty positive for the yields on those crops. NDSU Extension is saying that there's more of a risk for fusarium head blight and other diseases with the warm, wet weather we've been having. And it's definitely warm. So as we're recording this, it's 94 degrees outside my office window. And those in the south might laugh at me for thinking that's super hot, but for my northern self, it's way too hot outside.
Yeah, today we have a special guest for our Field View version of FP Next. And we're talking with Elizabeth Hodges, a staff writer for Farm Progress, pretty familiar face to us, who writes for Nebraska and Dakota. She lives in Lincoln. I think she writes for Nebraska Farmer, Dakota Farmer, Kansas Farmer. Gee, your byline shows up all kinds of places, Liz. Many of our other sister publications. So Liz is still a college student and I think is planning to graduate from the University of Nebraska perhaps in December. And she is a rock star because she's working full-time for us while also finishing her bachelor's degree, right?
I know Liz does crazy double duty during the school year, but we're super happy that she met all of us and our chaos and decided to stick around. And now she's a full time fixture on our team. And also, I don't think there's anybody who loves Nebraska more than Liz does.
So Liz hails from Julian, Nebraska in Nemaha County, way down south in the southeast corner of the state, right, Liz? So why don't you tell us just a little bit about your hometown and your home area?
Yeah, so if you don't know where Julian is at, don't worry because most people don't. It's a town of about 50 people and it's right in between Nebraska City and Auburn, right off Highway 75. If you blink, you'll probably miss the turn to go to Julian. Um, but yeah, so I actually went to high school at Johnson Brock, which also is a small town of 300 people, and was involved in 4 H and FFA growing up. And of course, all the sports and all of that comes with being part of a small school. You're kind of involved in everything. But yeah, now I am at UNL and will be graduating in December with majors in ag communications and animal science. So I was on the livestock judging team, meat animal eval team at UNL. So like to stay pretty active, and I think that helps when I am writing from Nebraska, Kansas, and the Dakotas, just being able to interact with a lot of people.
You definitely stay busy and you kind of cover the biggest range of all of us because we all have our regional publications of like the Dakotas or Nebraska specific. And you kind of get to see a little bit of everything. So I know you're always busy. And you also write your Gen Z Aggie column, which of course runs in Dakota Farmer and all of our Western publications here at Farm Progress. And I heard that you recently attended a big birthday party on behalf of Nebraska Farmer. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
I was invited by the Brownville Historical Society to go and talk about Robert Furness and the history of Nebraska Farmer. And I think it was his 200th birthday celebration that we were celebrating. And it was really cool just to hear all of the stories of how he made an impact in Nebraska. Obviously, I got to sit at his desk that they had shipped in. And that was really cool, just feeling like the torch was being passed down. Overall, it was just really rewarding to see how rich Nebraska farmer history was. It made me proud to be writing for this publication, but also proud to be in Nemaha County, where we have a lot of rich history of agriculture.
It's kind of like coming full circle, right, Liz? I mean, because you're from the same county as the founder of Nebraska Farmer Magazine, that's really special. The cool photo that ran with that column was of you sitting by Robert Furness's desk, actual desk that he, wrote from when he founded Nebraska Farmer in October 1859, so 165 years ago. So that was very cool. Um, so you started out as an intern, a summer intern for Nebraska Farmer. Then you worked as an intern for Husker Harvest Days for us as well. Got to be on the new products team and met everybody on the Farm Progress team. So that's kind of how you came to work full time for us. And we're really glad to have you on staff with our Farm Progress team. So you've covered, tons of stories for us over the last couple of years. Do you have a favorite story or two maybe that you've covered?
Yeah, I would say picking a favorite is probably hard, but one of my favorites was, I guess, just keeping up with the livestock judging team and writing about my experience in my column while I was traveling the road. I got to hear back from a lot of different producers that were like, yeah, like I shared those similar experiences. So that was cool to see that no matter when you judged for the University of Nebraska, the culture is still there. I would also say anything that I'd have to write about pigs. I'm gonna give a shout out to the Dakota farmer. So yeah, the story I did over Adam Kraus, that was really cool because a lot of times you would, as a pig farmer, I grew up on a hog farm. Like, not a lot of people are allowed onto the hog farm for biosecurity reasons. That was really cool, just being able to go in and see his pigs and talk about how he came to where he's at now. And then also how he does a lot of ag advocacy with his cooking show. So not only does he raise pigs, but he teaches people how to cook with pork, which I think is just as valuable when it comes to selling pork.
I know, I love that story. It was our cover story for Pork Month, I think, in 2023. And if there's ever a pig farm to go to, Liz is on the job. And of course, Liz, you know we always talk food here at FP Next. On our last Farm Files episode, we visited about our favorite fair foods. And last year, after Husker Harvest Days, you introduced me to Runza, which is a Nebraska favorite after Husker. But being on the team at Husker Harvest Days, we live and breathe on the showgrounds that whole time. What would you say your favorite Husker food is, or your favorite food from the show? Because there's so many great food stands available.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go back to the theme that I'm a pork lover through and through. I'm gonna say the Pork Palace is always a good place to go get a pulled pork sandwich or anything like that. But you definitely have to come for a couple days, try out all the food places, because it's certainly one of the perks of being at Husker Harvest Days.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is to try them all, right? I mean, you got to hit every stand because they all kind of have their own little specialty. So, I mean, just work at one side of the show site to the next and eat your way through Husker Harvest Days, I guess. I think that's the plan. I guess getting down to why we're visiting with you today, Liz, you've been working on a story about some salmon farmers in southeast Nebraska at Nebraska Vegetable and Protein. So we're hoping, it's a little bit of an unusual venture in corn and soybean country and wheat country, but would you share with our listeners a little bit about that family and the farm that you recently did that interview and kind of what you learned from those folks?
So, if you think of Nebraska commodities, salmon definitely isn't one of them that necessarily comes to mind. But I think it's really cool just seeing the diversity across agriculture, especially in the state of Nebraska. So, Nebraska Vegetable and Protein is owned by Keel and Mimi Vanderveen, which is about 3 miles south of Nebraska City. And they started this 3 years ago. It kind of was an interesting way to come about raising salmon in Nebraska, but they just have a very adventurous and love education. So it was definitely something that after meeting them that it was like, okay, this makes sense of why you would try something so differently. It was just really cool to see the sustainability and ingenuity that came with this operation, and I'm excited for everyone to read about it.
I know when you're talking about salmon farming in Nebraska, I don't think you could really pick more of a landlocked state. So I think it's definitely something people aren't expecting. And so the USDA shares in their most recent data that marine and freshwater aquaculture is a $1.5 billion industry in the US, producing upwards of 658 million pounds of fish annually. And by region, most of the aquaculture takes place along the coasts, not surprisingly, which is the West Coast, East Coast, and the Gulf of Mexico. The US ranks 18th in the world in aquaculture, so we are a pretty minor player, and we still import about 70 to 85% of our seafood from other countries. And that data goes back to 2020. And kind of like we said, salmon farming in Nebraska is something you aren't really expecting. And so, seeing that salmon farm up close, do you think there might be other opportunities for farmers looking for non conventional ag to try out, even if they are in other landlocked states?
Yeah, so I definitely think that this could be something that maybe is a trend and people catch on and do this just because I'm not going to lie, if you're going to eat fish in Nebraska, it's probably come a long ways and maybe isn't the freshest. So I myself am not a big seafood person, but maybe if there was fresher options that were locally grown, maybe that's something that people can start expanding their diets, I guess, too. But I've heard, as I've been talking to people about salmon and everything, I've heard people converting old pig barns into basically a big fish bowl to grow fish in. And so, if there's an old pig barn lying around that nobody's raising pigs in, maybe that's something that can also um, be an avenue for more revenue and diversify a farm. But like I don't know, it's a very small operation that they're running, but still, with how small it is, they're able to produce around 25 tons of salmon every year. And that's something that they're starting with the eggs. They go through the whole process and butcher it all themselves and then market it locally. So I think that's definitely something interesting that they're keeping everything local, the jobs, and even the produce. So
We like Nebraska raised beef and pork, and poultry. So why not Nebraska raised salmon, right? I mean, we just as well get used to some of those old hog barns too. That's kind of a neat take on it, I think. So why do you think? I mean, they probably could have chosen anywhere to be. Why do you think they chose like Nebraska and the Great Plains? And what are their markets? I mean, did they have some connection to Nebraska City, or was it an opportunity that they came up with? I was just curious as to how they selected their site.
yeah, so I believe that they're both native to Nebraska City, so that's kind of just an easy answer, I guess. But when you look at it more in depth, you go to Lincoln and Omaha, and especially in Omaha, we're known for our restaurants, and so I think having that market of where they can directly sell salmon and even their vegetables with their aquaculture system straight to restaurants. And the restaurants love that because they can market it as uh, Nebraska grown, and it's also a fresher product. And it's all around just helps out everybody. So yeah, I think that that definitely plays a role of just like the restaurants only being an hour and a half away from where it's being grown.
So that's kind of a model for someone who wanted to get into this anywhere in the country. Even in the middle of corn and soybean country, for instance, that it's something that they could do, but they still have to have a market. But it just seems like, it's an opportunity. What is their background? I understand they haven't grown much except other vegetables, and it isn't like they're traditional farmers. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Mimi, I believe, has a background in education. So they obviously have that learning spirit. And Keel actually works in finance. So that's something a little different, maybe not as conventional as like a third or fourth generational farmer, but they all want to learn. And that's kind of how it all started, I guess. They give a good story of how the aquaculture like even came to be. Was Mimi was giving birth to her first child, and she said that he caught her in a vulnerable moment because she would have probably said yes to anything at that point. But then it kind of got the ball rolling and went down the road, and Keel got a grant and was able to go and travel and study other salmon farms, just to see the logistics of it and all of that. And that grant also helped them start up to where they're at now. So it's definitely, they're not afraid to ask questions and they just go from there.
So, Liz, in addition to working on this salmon story, you have a lot of experience with hogs, of course, like we've already talked about, and you got to attend the World Pork Expo in Iowa recently. Tell us a little bit about your swine credentials, your extensive and impressive livestock judging experience you kind of already touched on with your column, and then how was World Pork Expo this year?
Yeah, so I grew up on a third generation purebred Berkshire hog operation where we farrow to finish and we sell some seed stock on the side to help get producers into this niche market. But we sell to a cooperative called Birkwood in Des Moines, Iowa, where then they go off and sell to mostly white tablecloth restaurants and higher end stuff because we do have that purebred product. So I definitely, between being on the livestock judging team, growing up on a hog farm, and being on meats, I'm definitely a pork snob. So there's that. And so, yeah, I guess my experience on the livestock judging team, I kind of became the pork gal and became that was kind of my specialty there too. But it was definitely super cool to travel across the country, and we were able to go and see some hog operations that maybe if you were just by yourself you probably wouldn't have seen. So being able to make those connections across the Midwest and into the South of just like seeing different hogs. They raise pigs a little differently in the South. They look a little different than Midwest hogs, but it was all a great experience that kind of just kick-started, I guess, my title of being the hog and meats girl. So
It's what you and Kevin Schultz over at the farm in Minnesota share in column since he writes Hog Outlook and you grew up on a hog farm. You guys just both the pork people at Farm Progress. So we love it. And I do have a feeling I know the answer to this question. You might have a little bit of a bias, but do you think it's easier to raise salmon or hogs?
well, I guess easier versus what's probably more fun. I would probably rather raise hogs, but salmon, I don't know. They can be a little, if the pH is off, that could be hard to do too. But then you got biosecurity of pigs. So I don't know. I say probably hogs, but maybe that's just my bias speaking.
I'm sure you are very biased, but that's okay. It just kind of depends on what you want to do, I suppose. So, your column with Nebraska Farmer, which runs, I think, in Dakota Farmer, Nebraska, probably Kansas, I think maybe Missouri, and a bunch of our other publications, is called Gen Z Aggie, which is really, very well named, I thought. And can you tell us just a little bit about, how your college career has progressed and what you think, some of the challenges are facing your generation, both on the farm and, in the ag workplace, for instance?
Yeah, so I definitely see a lot of people that are having that aren't going back into production agriculture. And so I don't know if we'll see an impact of that down the road, or maybe they find their way back to the production ag sometime in the future. But I also, right now, a big challenge for kids my age, and I luckily did not have this problem because I was hired straight out of an internship, is just job hunting and finding that job that you want to kickstart your career with. And maybe it's not your dream job, but it's that stepping stone to what you want next. And so I just have a lot of friends that are going through job interviews after job interview and just trying to find something that aligns with their goals. It's probably the biggest challenge that kids are having right now.
Well, it's a good thing we've talked about job hunting and some resources available for people to help. And that was one of our recent deep dive episodes. So make sure you check that out. And then we'll also link Liz's stories in the episode description so you can check out those links. And also, Liz, you've been out to a bunch of field days so far this summer. So, what do you think farmers are most concerned about from what you're hearing?
Yeah, so I was actually just at a weed management field day, and one of the big research projects that was going on over near Hastings was finding ways to get rid of palmer in fields, which is a big problem in Nebraska. And so one way that they've done this is interseeding with like barley or rye, or they also tried oats with corn and soybeans just to try and find a way to reduce their chemical usage, but also be effective when they are trying to manage their weeds out in the field.
So, Liz, I have another question for you that we really hadn't planned to ask, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it anyway because I think you probably have insight into this as much as anyone. It's something everybody kind of talks about around the horn anyway. But how do you think COVID, you know, graduating kind of and being in high school during that time and kind of going through that situation during COVID, how do you think that impacted, your age group? Because you guys have experiences that no one else could ever say they had because this is so unusual. But, when you were in high school at that age, because that would have been the age you were, is a very unique experience and traumatic for many. Um, does it make you more resilient? Does it make you more fearful? How do you think that kind of played out? And I'm sorry for throwing that at you, but I think you probably are a good person to answer that because I think a lot of people think about it.
Yeah, so I definitely think that the class of 2020, at least, and probably the year before and year after, we had these plans laid out and we knew what we were going to do and all of this stuff. And then COVID hit and it all kind of was in limbo. So I think that made us uh, really able to adapt to our environment and the situations that we were put in. Like a lot of people in Nebraska, we didn't go to our state convention my senior year and all of that, and starting college online. So we were have to find, like, for example, when we went to college, usually you have in-person classes, you make friends that way. Most of my classes were online my freshman year, so we had to find new ways to network and make friends. And so I think when we go out into the workforce now, we're able to kind of roll with the punches and find out new ways to like overcome challenges or roadblocks that might be ahead of us.
Um, as a ag college student, a current student, going to graduate pretty soon, what pieces of advice then would you give for high school graduates, college students, and even college grads who are out in the job market right now, and are trying to find their place in ag? What would be your pieces of advice for them?
Yeah, I would say from experience, internships are key when you're in college. It's a way that you're able to kind of see, oh, is this what I like? Is this not what I like? In my experience, I kind of knew that I really liked journalism because I wrote for the Midwest Messenger in high school, and so knew that that was kind of the route that I wanted to go. And so I think just being open to different internship opportunities that might come up. And if there's not something that's necessarily available, reaching out. And if you want to work for a certain company, reaching out and see if they would have you as an intern because maybe the position's not there, but you still can learn a lot from them. And I think that's, yeah, just relevant for high school and college kids is just trying it out while you're in college. So when you get to the point where you're graduating, you kind of know, okay, this is at least what I don't like to do. Maybe this is a career path that I would like.
I think that's all great advice because especially the part of like the internship, you can just like try out the job and even if it's not the exact company you want to work with or place you want to work, you can still know if you like it or not. And so we're glad you did the Husker Harvest Days internship and stayed. And then another, switching off topic a little bit, you wrote a recent story covering the top ag majors in some of our Western region states. And so this is kind of a two-part question, but we talked about Husker Harvest Days and the food. The first question is, what have you found to be the most fun part of Husker Harvest Days? And what was most surprising in the data you found on popular ag majors?
Yeah, so my favorite part of Husker Harvest Days, honestly, is just being able to catch up with people that maybe I only see once a year at Husker Harvest Days, whether that be you guys, my coworkers at Farm Progress, because we all work remotely, so it's always a treat to spend a few days with everybody. But I also like running into people from back home, or maybe they are in Lincoln and I run into them at the college. It's really cool just being able to network with them and see what they're enjoying the most out of the show. So we can take that back and kind of make changes so it's the best show for everybody. But personally, I really like the demos a lot when you're at the show. I think it's really cool to see that hands on and like the technology really working in action. And you have those experts there. If you are in the market, like my brother is trying to work up to get a hay business. And so with that, he went out to the hay demos and he was able to talk to different people about different equipment just to see what fit him the best. And so I think that's a great place for young, old, all in between, to go and learn about new technology and talk to the experts about it. And then, as far as it goes with the majors that I thought was the most surprising, I would say that biochemistry made the list of many schools. Because when you think of ag, you don't necessarily think of biochem, but those people are going back and being a vet or working in labs and that research side, which definitely is still very important when it comes to advancing the industry. But one thing I was glad to see that animal science was so high is that's one of my majors. And so it was cool to see it's not just vet students that are doing animal science either. There's those production ag kids, other kids that will go back and work in the industry and support the livestock industry in some way.
We all love animal science here at Farm Progress.
Yes, for sure.
And quite literally, biochem was one of my least favorite classes. But I was an animal science major, so all those years ago. But
I think they've taken out that requirement for biochemistry because I didn't have to take it. So,
oh, well, lucky you, lucky you. So, Liz, we want to thank you for being a guest today on FP Next. You shared your insights not just on the salmon farming thing, but what you've learned from that, but also on, kind of understanding that next gen as far as, the ag majors, but also in the job market and also on the farm. So I appreciate that.
yeah, no, I appreciate being on the show and getting to talk to some of my favorite editors. So,
Well, you're one of our favorite staff writers. So there you go. So we also look forward to kind of getting the team together because, farm show season is really coming fast, and Farm Progress Show coming up soon in Boone, Iowa. And of course, Husker Harvest Days in Grand Island. So we'll have our team all together again, which is always a fun time to catch up with friends, see farmers we only see at the shows, and, learn more about the latest and greatest. And I want to make a plug because this year we'll have a new cover crop demonstration plot at Husker Harvest Days. This is a new thing, helping visitors learn more from the experts about how to bring cover crops into the operation. So that's going to be kind of a fun thing to watch out for if you're going to Husker Harvest Days this year. And at Farm Progress Show, I think farmers will be really interested in the autonomy zone, highlighting some of the great new products like smart sprayers and sprayer drones, for instance, along with all, of course, the big equipment introductions that always take place every year. So we're going to wrap up this field view version of FP Next powered by John Deere. To our listeners, we want to thank you for listening in to this episode of FP Next, allowing us into your tractor cab, your shop, your truck, on your farm, and in your fields. A special thank you goes out to our digital production and marketing team members who put in a lot of work with us. And we want to remind our listeners again about Farm Progress Show this year in Boone, Iowa, August 27th through the 29th. And of course, Husker Harvest Days set for Grand Island on September 10th through the 12th. And if you want to be sure not to miss any top stories or farm show news, sign up for our Farm Progress text blasts, which bring the hot stories right to your inbox.
You can sign up for those text alerts by texting FARM, FARM, to 20505. Be sure to follow Farm Progress on social media to stay up to date with ag news and more. And check out the digital edition of your regional publications at farmprogress.com. And speaking of farm shows, be sure to tune into our next episode of FP Next. We're going to have a special video episode with our very own farm show director here at Farm Progress, Matt Youngman, to hear about what everyone should look out for at the farm shows this year.
Yep, we're looking forward to visiting with Matt about the farm shows coming up, so it should be a great episode and you won't want to miss it.
Follow along with FP Next by listening and subscribing on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube or Farm Progress online, and be sure to leave us a review if you enjoy the show.
It's 5 stars or nothing, right, Sarah?
Always. And remember, if it's agriculture, your friends at Farm Progress have you covered. Here's wishing you high yields and good weather. We'll see you next time.